Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today we are wrapping up our Eastern Conference NBA season previews. We already did the Atlantic and Southeast divisions. If you want, please feel free to go back and watch those episodes. We have a playlist on our YouTube channel that will have all of our division previews because I know that we're spreading these out. So if you missed any, if those first ones were a little too far out for you to really be excited for NBA season, just know that you can easily go back and rewatch those whenever you want. Today, we are touching on the Central Division, Logan. So as always, let's start from the top. Who do you have winning this division?
I've got the Milwaukee Bucks winning this division again, Carson. I have them going 48-34, a game back from their record last season. And the biggest question to me about the Bucks this season is just how healthy they're going to be. That's been a big issue with the Bucks in recent memory. Giannis has only played 3 playoff games in the last 2 seasons. I think it's not a major concern for me, but if Giannis misses time in the playoffs again, I think maybe we need to be worried. He also, though, is getting up there in age. Giannis is going to be 30 years old this season, and I don't know, man. You don't tend to get healthier or any more spry as you get up there in age. Chris Middleton hasn't played more than 70 games in a single year in 6 seasons. He's missed 76 games over the last 2 years. He's going to be 33 this season. I think when you're looking at a team like the Bucks, I think they're going to need a guy like Middleton and, just to be available because they're not like this super talent-loaded team from top to bottom. I don't particularly love this depth, so I think it is important that you have these guys available as much as possible. And my biggest concern outside of health is just this defense again. It was the biggest issue with the Bucks last season, and I think it's going to be the biggest issue again. There's just such a low ceiling with this defense. They were number 19 last season in defensive rating. They were the 3rd worst isolation defense. They were the third worst defense defending pick-and-roll ball handlers. And there's just glaring personnel limitations once again this season. I don't think they have a good point-of-attack defender in this rotation. That's barring big Andre Jackson Jr. minutes. I really like him as a defender, but he can only play so much because of how limited he is offensively. I just think they're at a really big disadvantage on the perimeter with trotting out a lineup that's probably going to be Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton, and Gary Trent Jr. looking at guys that are just physically and athletically limited at this point in their careers. They're slower, older defenders. They aren't the most physical or strong guys. And so then I look back to the other end of the floor, Carson, and I look at how great this offense can be. I think that the Bucks should steer into the skid and just maximize their offense to an extent. Spread the floor out. I think you put Brook in a corner or above the break. You run more Giannis and Dame pick and roll as we touched on all last season. It's kind of concerning to me, Carson, when you look at the numbers using these guys as role men. Brook is being used in pick and rolls almost 3 times more than Giannis was last season. That's concerning to me when you're just I am spamming Dame and Giannis pick and roll, bro. I am using those 2 guys in as many actions as possible.
Yeah.
And I do think Brook is a bit of a problem here with this roster because I would love if the Bucks could, like I said, steer into the skid, play up-tempo basketball, maybe like Giannis at the 5 or something, dude, and just try to run up the score. It's an issue when Brook is such a plodding and slow big man. But you have to play Brook Lopez because the Bucks defense was 8.1 points per 100 possessions better with Brook. They love to run that drop coverage versus a pick and roll. It can win you a lot of regular season basketball games. But the difference is astounding. Last season, Carson, they had a defensive rating of 113.2 with Brook. That's basically tied for 11th in the league. Without him, they have a defensive rating of 121.3. That would be dead last in all of the NBA. And so my best solution is to just lean as heavily into your 2 stars as you can, man. Use Giannis and Dame as much as you can. I would maybe shop Chris Middleton if you can, dude, until the trade deadline and see if you can get back 2 players for the rotation. I got a feeling they're going to ride this thing out with this old group. But in a lot of ways, I kind of feel like they're stuck in no man's land, Carson. I feel like they're too good to bottom out, but they're too bad to legitimately contend. I feel like with the moves that the Sixers have made, and I know that may seem hot considering where Dame was 2 years ago and how last year we thought this had thrusted the Bucks into real championship contention. I just feel like when you look at the talent around the league, the Sixers got better. The Knicks got considerably better, right? I think the Pacers, with what we saw from them in the playoffs, they have a good playoff recipe where they could upset a team in round 1, and they're not going to be they're not going to be an easy out. I feel like the Orlando Magic are still steadily ascending, and in a lot of ways, the Bucks are just plateaued here with this old group of veterans that they have and a coach that I really don't believe in. So the star talent is there. They're just old, and they didn't get better this offseason, man. So I don't really have any higher expectations for them. I see them as kind of somewhere between the 4th and 6th team out east.
Wow.
And I don't view them as real contenders. Do you feel any differently than that?
I don't feel dramatically different. However, I wouldn't say that they're in no man's land. I mean, they're still very clearly an upper echelon team. I would have them 4th in the East at full strength. However, I think that they're closer to the Sixers in my 3 spot than they are Orlando in my 5 spot. Like, I don't want to understate the significance of having what should still be, in my opinion, the best duo in basketball. And I think that that is a major key for this Milwaukee team ceiling. Does Dame have the sort of bounce back season where he is playing like a top 20 guy? Because we know that Giannis is going to be a top 3 player on the planet. I don't think that we're going to see Dame get back to his 2023 levels, which was legitimately as well as he's ever played. That was an unbelievable season in Portland. 32 a game, 65% true shooting, made them a 90th percentile offense when he was on the floor. But I think we can expect him to be somewhere between that and between last season, because a lot went wrong for Milwaukee last year, and there were definitely some things that went wrong for Dame. He and Giannis simply did not make the most out of their fit. I mean, you mentioned the 2-man game. It was efficient when they went to it, but it wasn't nearly as dominant as it could have been. They didn't deploy it at the volume they could have. I mean, it's really an ideal fit when you think about a dude who can stretch defenses out to 30 feet like Dame can, pairing him with one of the greatest downhill threats in the history of the sport, who was also a high-end playmaker. Like, you should be stressing defenses every single time where they're either terrified of conceding a Dame pull-up 3, they're terrified of conceding a Giannis roll, and so they're converging on him, they're allowing an open corner 3, or they're worried about the corner 3 and Giannis is able to take it all the way to the rim. Like, that should have been much more unstoppable and deployed much more often than it actually was. And Dame and Giannis didn't work out together at all over this offseason, which does concern me a little bit, but I still think just after a year of playing basketball, there's still another 3 weeks almost until the season. I think their synergy in 2-man game has to be at least a bit better. And you mentioned the thing with Brook, like that to me was limiting for Dame. Having to run such a high percentage of his pick and rolls with a big who simply is not any sort of downhill threat as a roller, no vertical spacing. Like, when you have somebody who is the sort of pull-up threat that Dame is, you don't want a pick and pop big with him nearly as much as you want somebody who can stress the rim. And so you have the defense being pulled in 2 different directions, and that's not Brook Lopez whatsoever. So even though we saw Dame take a career low percentage of his shots at the rim, and he took more long 2s, and it was a bad 3-point shooting season by his standards, and he was just much more inconsistent than we've ever seen, and the fit wasn't as seamless as we hoped, he was still a 91st percentile pick and roll creator, still one of the greatest pull-up shooters we've ever seen, still an elite spot-up player in terms of efficiency, still eats up free throws. And the stylistic fit on paper with him and Giannis is just too good for me to think that they don't at least squeeze some more juice out of that. And in 12 games without Giannis, Logan, Dame gave you 30-7 on 63% true shooting. We saw what he was doing in the playoffs. That was just 4 games, but that still looked like a dominant offensive player. So it's just hard for me to think that there isn't still a top 20-ish sort of player in there. And Dame and Giannis on the floor together last year had a +10 net rating. When those two played, they had a 44-21 record. That's a 56-win pace. So this can, and I think this should be the best duo in basketball, and that's their path to a deep run. It's them simply dominating in a run, overpowering other teams in that star category. And I think that they're capable of that. This is a flawed team around them. I don't agree when you say that they haven't improved, though. Now, did they figure out their fundamental issues? No. Did they completely rewrite the ceiling for this team? No. They're still old. They're still slow. I'm with you on the Brook Lopez fit. He's just not somebody I want as my starting center at 36 years old, slow-footed defensively, no athleticism offensively, not quite the same defender that he was a couple years ago. Doc Rivers is not going to save this team. They were 17-19 after they hired him last year. There are clear flaws on this roster that they didn't solve. But I like what they did in terms of depth moves. One of the major issues for this Milwaukee team last year was their abysmal point of attack defense. I like Gary Trent Jr., compared to Malik Beasley at least, in his ability to be an above average point of attack defender. Because offensively, he brings that same elite shooting you got from Malik, spotting up off movement. He made 39% of his threes on 6.5 attempts per game last year. He's always been one of the league's best pure three-point shooters. And defensively, 6'9" wingspan, always been a guy who has good hands. He's a solid athlete. You need him to engage. You need him to buy in to being this team's lead point of attack defender. And by the way, even if he does, it's not going to be a good point of attack defense at all. But if we're just comparing them to last year, yes, I think he's an upgrade in that role from Malik Beasley. Getting him on the minimum is excellent work by this front office. In terms of other depth additions, I've always liked DeLon Wright. Another dude who can help that point of attack defense. These guys aren't going to solve it, but he's 6'5" with a 7'6" wingspan. He works on the defensive end. He's a solid shooter. He's got solid feel.
He has a 7'6" wingspan.
Is that what I said? I meant 6'7", of course.
Shit.
No. No. DeLon Wright is not a pterodactyl. My fault on that one.
The greatest prospect of all time, DeLon Wright.
My fault. Brother of Darrell, though. Shout out to the Wright family. But just in terms of having a bench guard who you can have play sort of a combo guard role and who's solid on both sides of the ball, another good value add. Taurean Prince can hit 38% of his threes. Like, I do feel better about their depth. I feel better about their starting situation at the 2. And if you're looking for another positive, Middleton has had his health concerns, but he's been healthy for 2 straight postseasons, only a series each year, so I don't want to overreact to that. But when they've needed him, he's been out there. And he's balled the hell out. And his shot making is still there. And his playmaking is as good as it's ever been. So if you just need him to be your third option offensively, he's still a damn good one. Yes, he's limited athletically. Not a high-end defender. Not a good positional rebounder. Not a great positional rebounder, at least. But a very good offensive third option. So those are all the reasons that I do still think this Milwaukee team is very good. But the red flags, some of which we've already touched on, they were a below 500 team after they hired Doc Rivers last year. Dame and Giannis, Logan, both only missed 9 games last year. And I mentioned that they were really good with both those dudes on the floor, but still, like, that's a really healthy season overall for your 2 best players. And this was a 49-win team last year in the East that was 12th in net rating and it was 19th in defensive rating. And I still think that because of all the athletic issues that we've touched on, this is going to be a below average defense. They have major issues on the perimeter, even with Gary Trent Jr. in there. There's weak points that you can hunt. Dame is a massive liability. Brook is going to really struggle to guard in space. Just outside of Giannis, like, they are completely lacking athletes on this team. They're weak rebounding around Giannis. And Giannis and Brook can't just, like, single-handedly carry a defense like they could a couple years ago, which, by the way, they didn't because Drew was so great at the point of attack. But I think both of them have taken a little step back athletically and defensively over the last couple years. So I can't rule them out going on a run, an Eastern Conference Finals run, because of Dame and Giannis and because I do think that they've improved this roster on the margins. I think they're better than last year. But if I'm comparing them to the Knicks, no, I don't think they're as good a basketball team. They just don't have as many high-end players. They have a much more glaring flaw on the defensive end. So if you want to talk about the Bucks as top-tier title contenders, I don't see that. But I would still separate them from the rest of the Eastern Conference, the 5-8 range, because they just have a weapon in terms of star power that nobody else does. And I don't want to discount that.
For sure. Let me ask you this. Do you think there's any move or any archetype of player that they could go out and hunt mid-season at the trade deadline or something that could change your outlook for them in terms of ceiling, that would propel them into a different tier? Like if it was shopping a Brook, if it was shopping a Middleton, maybe if you send off a bench asset. And it's hard because, you know, these guys have been a part of this team's, like, culture and identity, and they are, you know, still really impactful and important pieces to this team winning games. But is there any kind of player archetype that you can imagine that would leapfrog the Bucks into that real contenders tier?
I think it's really just all about getting more athletic. I think if they just had a simple, high-end rim-running, rim-protecting center Like, not talking about an elite player, talking about an equivalent to
What about like
a Jared Allen sort of type.
what about like a Clint Capella, for example?
Clint Capella, I'm not sure really moves the needle for me versus Brook. I don't think that he's the level defender at this stage that you would need to like really change things there. And offensively, yeah, he's a fine, simple rim finisher, but he's very limited in terms of skills. So I think it would have to be a more significant athletic upgrade than that. Like I mentioned, a Jared Allen, who isn't going to be moved because the Cavs extended him.
Maybe. I'm trying to think about guys that may
Claxton would be good.
Available.
Claxton would be good. I think that would be an amazing defensive front court, but he just got extended, man. And the Bucks have come out and said, or Brian Windhorst reported that they've said, they're not going to trade Brook Lopez. So I just think that they're all in on this core, and I think that they've been all in on this core for too long. The 2021 title run, as we look back, was an incredible feat on the part of Giannis, and Middleton played some of his best basketball ever, but that was an aging core, and that was a weak field that they faced in the playoffs, and I just think committing to that core for another 4 years now, what we're coming up on, it's too much. And I'm with you. Like, they're not miraculously reopening a title window unless you get a crazy Dame resurgence, which I don't think you can expect him to just become like a fringe top 10 player again. I'm expecting a bounce back. I'm not expecting magic, though.
Yeah, and I do see the Bucks struggling in certain matchups versus teams. That's why I really want them to lean into like just bigger physical teams in the East. That's why I want them to lean on to Dame and Giannis heavy and try to maximize the most they can out of the offense, because I think there are teams that have just defensive and rebounding edges over Milwaukee. I'm not saying these teams would beat them outright, but I think they could make it competitive. Like, I think Orlando could make a series against Milwaukee, for example, really competitive, just with all the athletes and the size that they have. Like, they could muck that series up. I think Cleveland could do that to an extent. I think the Knicks are obviously like a shoo-in to beat them, but they have so much more size and physicality everywhere. Even if they address the depth a little bit, because you look at the guys behind Giannis and Brook in the front court, it's basically just Bobby Portis Jr. And hey, man, I love Bobby Portis Jr. as much as anybody else, but like that's a 6'10 guy who is traditionally at your 4 spot. He's not going to anchor your defense off the bench. He's not, he's a good rebounder for his size, but there are just other teams that have more depth there, that have better guys in the front court, and I think that's what's gonna come back to bite them. And that's just my point with Milwaukee, man, is when you have Giannis and Dame and you don't have a championship ceiling, to me that's a problem. Like I just think they've done a really bad job of building out their roster around these guys, and it feels like this could all be for naught. Like this could be just wasted years of good basketball from these guys. And it sucks because I don't think there's a simple solution to getting yourself out of this and building a contender. But
yeah,
I do think they improved. I agree with you. I think they got better with the moves they made, but I just don't think it's going to be enough.
And we talked throughout the offseason about paths that they could potentially take in the draft. I wanted them to try to target either a center who was more athletic, like an Yves Missy, or ideally like a Deron Holmes who could space the floor. Obviously, he's going to be out for the season now. But that is the challenging part of this, is I'm talking about some of the athletic traits that you want from your center if you're Milwaukee. At the same time, playing Giannis with a non-shooting center presents challenges of its own, which is why you mentioned looking to the Giannis at the 5. Like, I thought that could be a legitimate path for them this year. Try to get a big, strong rebounding forward who brings that offensive skill and defensive versatility, but like a legit 4 you feel like you can pair alongside Giannis, and we're formidable enough in the front court and we're more skilled offensively. I honestly would probably argue that would have been the best path. Like, I really wanted them to try to get a Tristan da Silva in the draft. He ends up being off the board before. They end up taking A.J. Johnson, which I did not like, and he's going to be a non-factor this year at the very least. I can guarantee you that. So that, in the short term for this title window, is just a bad pick in my eyes. I wanted them maybe to try to target a Denny Avdia. That didn't happen. So, no, I don't like what they've done. And they've just been attached to Brook for a long time. It is tricky to figure out the ideal front court mate with Giannis, and I think a few years ago that was Brook. that was Brook, having a dude who could space the floor like that and who was that elite a pure rim protector and just a little bit more agile, just a little bit more athletic. Obviously, never been his strength post 30. That was a nice pairing. But I think now he's aged out of being a dude who can be one of your top 4 players if you want to win the title. So I'm with you. I think it would be a real long shot for the Bucks to win the title. I just think a lot of the other teams around them in these conversations are more complete. And I also don't disagree that they could get upset by one of these teams in the 5-6 seed range. Indiana, obviously we saw beat them this past year, but that's without Giannis. But like, if you just get into a shootout, Indiana's younger than you, they're faster than you, they have better depth than you, so they are going to push their tempo, and you're old and you're slow, and their offense is as good as anybody's, and you're going to really struggle to stop a team like that. So yeah, they're going to struggle to stop you, but if you're talking about 2 great offenses, 2 bad defenses, Indiana has the better offense in a vacuum. Like, that series could go against you. I definitely wouldn't pick it because Giannis and Dame, but it's certainly not impossible.
I mean, looking at that matchup in, like, logistically, I could see the Bucks getting beat in transition a bunch too, just surrendering a lot of points to Indiana just because of how fast they play. Like, yeah, I do think Milwaukee is susceptible in that way that, you know, just other teams with stars aren't. It's disappointing, man. I just don't see a lot of good outcomes for the Bucks in this, and I think they should try Giannis at the 5. Just experiment with it a little bit, man. And I know they've done it, you know, in stretches.
But you're talking about as like an actual starting configuration.
Just try it, man. Just see, you know, see what that look. Maybe try Bobby Portis at the 4. Bring Brook off the bench or something. I don't know exactly what that lineup looks like. It's not going to be a seamless fit by any means, but I wonder if just playing a little bit faster. And the last thing on this, the other issue with that, I think, would just be, can Giannis fully exert himself with what he's doing offensively? You know, that would be my last concern. Is just, can he fully commit to anchoring your defense the way he needs to be? Because it's not a skill thing with Giannis or an ability or an athletic question. It's just, does he have the stamina and the wherewithal to do everything he does offensively while carrying that load defensively? I don't know. But I think it's something, with how low your ceiling is with the Milwaukee, I think that's something worth exploring.
Yeah, but that is a good point. Because the Bucks defense with just Giannis out there last year without Brook, in which you do see a decent amount of Giannis playing the 5, effectively playing the 5, they had a defensive rating over 120. So their offense was great, as we talked about.
You know?
Like, that's tough, man. You have to either have a really good defensive 4, or you have to try to figure out who can replicate at least Brook's pure rim protection at the 5. They're apparently not looking for it. It's a tough thing to find, but I just think priority number 1 in this offseason should have been one of the 2 paths. So you at least have the option. So you at least have more looks. And again, I like what they did on the margins. I like what they did with their wing and guard depth, but is it enough to really, truly move the needle? I don't think so. And it's going to be interesting to see, what does the future look like from Milwaukee after this year? Because you've committed to this Dame Giannis window. As you mentioned, Giannis will be 31 next season. Dame is already 34. He'll be 35.
Well, Giannis will be in Dallas with Luka or something like that, man.
Good God, could you even imagine that? It is a precarious situation in Milwaukee, though, and I don't think that there's a lot of cause for optimism in terms of title hopes, which obviously was the expectation when you made the move for Dame. Logan, there's a very interesting race, I think, for the 2nd spot in this division. 2 teams that I think are of a very similar caliber. Who was 2nd in the Central Division to you?
I have both those teams winning the same amount of games. So
as do I.
But
who has the tiebreaker in your heart?
Look at that. I gave it to Cleveland just because as a defensive-minded coach,
which you are.
I like I'm always going to side on the team with the defense. So I did give the nod to Cleveland, but I have both of these teams finishing with a record of 47-35. My first question with Cleveland is, how does Darius Garland bounce back? And I think that's the most intriguing one. He dealt with a lot of injuries last season. The most prominent one was his broken jaw, and it was just a disappointing season overall. He wasn't really that great pre-injury. He wasn't great post-injury, and then in the playoffs, he gives you 16, 4, and 6 on 52% true shooting. Bottom line here with Darius, he's obviously going to have to play better for this team to hit their ceiling. And it was just exceptionally disappointing because of the trajectory that he was on. He was on such a strong upward trajectory. He's an all-star in 2022. He had back-to-back seasons of 22 points per game and 8 assists per game on over 58% true shooting. And he plateaued a little bit. You know, he had the jaw and the back injuries. He had hamstring, neck, ankle stuff going on too. But I tend to think he's going to bounce back in a big way this season. I just think that was a little bit of an anomaly dealing with all of that. I still don't like this fit, but I'm going to give you the floor here real quick just on Garland specifically. What do you think he looks like this season, and how do you think his play affects the Cavaliers' ceiling?
I'm honestly not super high on this season for Garland.
That's surprising.
I'm a long-time Garland enthusiast, man. I mean, I loved him as a prospect. I was singing his praises after his rookie year, saying this dude is going to be an all-star in this league. And then he was by his third year. But I do think that we saw some legitimate regression this past season. And I think that his continued struggles finishing around the rim, just getting quality, consistent looks inside the arc, that's real. He also just didn't seem like a comfortable, assertive basketball player last year. And especially in the playoffs, I just thought that he was bad. And I think that the fit here really is not good. I'm on team trade Garland, honestly. I think that the best configuration of this team is Donovan Mitchell, 3 super athletic, 3-and-D sort of wings, and Evan Mobley. Jared Allen also could hold down the big, but I think that Mobley clearly has a higher ceiling than Allen, and I think that to tap into that ceiling, Mobley should be at the 5, where you're not trying to ask him to stretch the floor out and do these things offensively that really aren't his forte. Like, he thrived as your center offensively in the playoffs this past season, and I totally believe that he can anchor a great defense at the 5 with the right personnel around him. If Darius Garland is going to be this small, negative defender in a backcourt that is small and super offensively oriented, and he's only going to give me 18 and 6 on 56% true shooting like he did last year, like, I would just rather have a quality 3-and-D wing in that role. And I think that Garland is a really talented shot creator. I think he's a really talented playmaker. I think his ball handling is out of this world. I think his pull-up shooting is really high level, can be lethal, but it's not working right now in Cleveland. I think that this entire big 4 is just clunky.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, Carson, is this year 2 or year 3 that we've been pitching this? What are we on right? I think year 3, year 4? It might be longer.
Pretty quick. Well, it can't be year 4 because this is only year 3 for Mitchell. But I would say by the tail end of year 1, some of these issues were pretty clear.
I mean, we've been doing this pitch, and you said a lot of what I was going to get into next, because I do think both things can be true. I think Darius Garland is going to bounce back and be better than he was last year, but I'm still going to suggest that the Cavaliers break up this core. I just think there's too much redundancy when you're looking at the skill sets with these stars. Mitchell and Garland, 2 smaller offensive ball-dominant guards. Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, 2 rim-protecting, interior, defensive-minded bigs. They just don't fit together perfectly. And when you think about championship teams and championship contenders, the guys complement each other. The puzzle pieces fit together. It just works. But I think they're going to ride it out. And so barring an extreme Evan Mobley leap, I think they're likely going to run into the same issues that plagued them in the playoffs this last season. I think that floor spacing is going to be an issue. I think you're going to see them struggle with half-court shot creation. They were a below-league average half-court offense. And if you look back to the playoffs last year, they had a playoff offensive rating of 104.7. That would be dead last in the NBA.
Yeah.
And the other big issue with this team is still legitimate big depth. I think you saw them run into it last year and 2 years ago when you're looking at non-Mobley and Jared Allen minutes. Their only backup big is like Tristan Thompson. And so, barring any moves, I think this is going to be a good regular season defense. I think they have enough shot creation to be an average offense. But I don't love the depth. And in a lot of ways, how we were talking about Milwaukee, this is a very similar team to last year. And so that's why I still think the Cavaliers are going to be limited. But another reason why I think they should break this group up, because we have been harping on this for a long, long time, Carson, I think you see the glimpses of what this team can do when everybody was beat up, and it was Donovan Mitchell and it was Jared Allen running the show, and you just had shooters last year. The offense was more spread out. It was more seamless. You see glimpses in the playoffs when it's just Evan Mobley on the low block. and you don't have a help side defender, because what's the issue when you have two bigs that are roaming around the paint? Jared Allen is always going to be around the rim because he has no value roaming around on the perimeter. His defender is not going to follow him out to the paint because he's not a threat to shoot. Jared Allen is not going to go out to the perimeter because he can't shoot. He's not valued there. His value is getting an offensive rebound or being there to finish a dunk. Without him there, it was Evan Mobley and one guy on the low block, and Evan Mobley can do a little bit down there. I just think the offensive fit would be less clunky. Obviously, I think you'd have more floor spacing. And then two, as you talked about in the offseason, Carson, you talked about Evan Mobley being one of the best handful of best defenders on planet Earth. I think Evan Mobley would thrive in that role, and I think you would see him blossom in – I think he already has blossomed, but I think you would see it consensus around the league that people would consider him to be one of the best defensive bigs on the planet. And I think he can single-handedly anchor your defense. That's why I think you should just go ahead and do it. And Jared Allen right now is a very valuable asset that I think a lot of teams would be interested in. And I think Darius Garland is a very intriguing asset that a lot of teams would be interested in. And don't get me wrong, it's probably going to be hard to get exact value for these two guys. You know, to get their value as players in archetypes that fit better. Those athletic 3-and-D wings that you're talking about, because those are very highly coveted around the league nowadays. But I just think it makes sense. I think it's made sense for 3 years. I think with the progression that you've seen from Evan Mobley makes it make even more sense now this season. And I think how you have seen Donovan Mitchell consistently carry this offense year over year is encouraging enough to let Garland walk and to get someone that's more complimentary. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, Carson. You and I have been saying this spiel for 3 years now, but the clock continues to tick, man. And continued frustrations year over year, it just makes you question, when has Donovan Mitchell had enough? You know, we hear the rumblings every year. When does he want to go on to a team that can actually have championship aspirations? But I don't think it's going to be this year, man. But I still think it's what they should do.
It's funny because we're trying to figure out how to really find the ideal fit at center for both of these teams. And I'm just thinking to myself, boy, how great would Isaiah Hartenstein be in either of these situations? Like, you think about everything that we're talking about, the Bucks needing defensively, a big who's more mobile in space, but then also is going to bring that high-end rim protection, elite rebounder who can bring playmaking offensively, is more of a threat as a roller, but also, even though he's not a traditional floor spacer, is going to really space it out to at least 12 feet with that elite push-shot floater game. I just think, like, he is such a complete center. What a stud. And if I'm going to pay Brook Lopez $23 million a year, or I'm going to give Jared Allen a 3-year, $90 million extension like the Cavs did, I would just rather pay Isaiah Hartenstein $30 million. I love Isaiah Hartenstein, I guess is the point of that. But I'm with you on a lot of this. I have the Cavs winning 48 games. I actually give the tiebreaker to Indiana, so I have Cleveland as my 7 seed in the East. And I think a lot of people might look at this team and say, well, last year they were super injured and they missed 25 plus games of Mitchell and Garland and Mobley. How could they not be better? And the reason is that I'm just not sure this team is better with all of their big four on the court. The best basketball they played last year was in the stretch where it was just Mitchell and Allen out there. And Donovan Mitchell is 22-6 as a Cav without Darius Garland. When those two play together, the Cavs are just 58-37. They win 60% of their games. Donovan Mitchell and the Cavaliers have a better offensive rating when he is out there alone on the floor than they do with Darius Garland on the floor. With all of their big four out there, this team just has a +2 net rating. Like, you mentioned the redundancies. You mentioned the lack of spacing in the front court. You mentioned the defensive limitations in the back court. That's not changing. I just don't see room for growth here accordingly, especially because the roster around them didn't get better, and basically everybody else in the conferences did, and you're not adding talent while you are confining some of your most talented players to these roles that just aren't great for them, like we see with Darius Garland. And as much as I love Evan Mobley, I do question how much he can continue to grow alongside Jared Allen, because as your center, In that series against Boston, he gave you 22, 9, and 3 on 63% from the field, man. And you do see that he has this really impressive ability to facilitate offense, running handoffs, spotting cutters at times. And if he is going to be the recipient of all these passes off the roll without another big mucking up the spacing, like, he can be a really efficient scorer for you offensively. And he's tried to take those strides as a jump shooter. He shot better from 3 last year, but the sample size is still just really small there. And the thinking with Mobley coming in was, we have this extremely versatile defensive big, but he's just not physically mature enough yet to anchor the 5. We want to put another big body alongside him, and that's led to great defenses, by the way. I would never question that formula defensively, because both of these guys are versatile enough, they're switchable enough, and they form the best rim protecting duo in basketball. That's not the question. The question is just, how much more can you get offensively while having Mobley anchor the 5? And defensively, are you really losing that much? Because I think that Mobley is there as a rebounder. I think he's really good. I think that he is a good post defender, and you can argue he needs to be tested a little bit more there, but I've been impressed with what I've seen from him there. And then you could, again, just be super athletic and more skilled around him in Donovan Mitchell. Their defense with Mobley on the floor and Allen off it was still elite last year. But this is all kind of hypothetical because they just extended Allen. So it's another team that is locked into this core, isn't adding talent, and again, has some of these subpar fits that aren't being changed. I legitimately think, as we talked about, Mitchell, Mobley, 3 damn good 3-and-D wings, that could be an elite basketball team. Because I think that Mobley is that sort of transformative defensive player who would progress offensively, because I think even though Donovan Mitchell isn't a point guard, he is a good enough playmaker, and he is such an exceptional scorer that he would create a high shot quality for you. Like, yes, I'd like to have some creation alongside him, but if I have to choose between that and a better fit in terms of that defensive and that off-ball shooting skill set, I would rather prioritize the latter. So I like a couple of the wings here. We barely got to see Dean Wade in the playoffs last year. He is a good basketball player. He's a damn good defender, and he's a 40% three-point shooter. I'm also a huge Jalen Tyson guy. I have to shout out my Cal Bear. Super versatile wing, tough bucket, good athlete, has some chops as a facilitator. I mean, can really score in numerous different ways. He's a smart, instinctual cutter. He can score out of the post. He can run pick and roll for you. He's a good offensive rebounder out of position, and he has the tools to be a plus defender. That's a good pickup, but again, these aren't things that are changing the complexion for this team. Okoro, Strus, Niang, Merrill. It's a fine rotation of wings. We know who all these guys are. So there'll be a fringe top 5 defense. There'll be an average offense. It's just last year's team. It's just last year's team, but in a better East. And if we are looking at the competition around them, if I have to pick between teams in that mold of elite defense, solid offense, I think Orlando has surpassed them now, if we were to see that rematch, which I don't think we will. But Cleveland still has the best player advantage with Donovan Mitchell, and that was big last year. But KCP's a big add for Orlando. I think their floor spacing is a lot better now. They have more offensive skill on the floor than the Cavs do, and Paolo and Franz are only going to be improving. So it's tough, man. If you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards, as we say so many times over, and Cleveland is kind of the epitome of that right now.
Yeah, well said, man. I mean, and when you're thinking about players in this mold, I think there's a lot of guys that work, but they're really valuable assets. These are guys that teams want to have, right? Like, when I think about the apex of, like, a complimentary player, you know, I go to, like, a Trey Murphy in New Orleans, or, you know, maybe on, like, a little bit of a lower scale, I think Denny Avdia would have been a great add for this team, right, if you could have moved off of them. There's a lot of guys. I mean, on the lower end, you know, Derrick Jones Jr., P.J. Washington for Dallas, you see how their complementary skill sets can work. You need athletic guys who can help you on the boards and help defend and defend in space, who are capable shooters, who can finish at the rim. You know, like, even like a Cam Johnson maybe in Brooklyn, like, you can find guys like this that work. It's all about getting that requisite value back. But honestly, Carson, I think we've seen a large enough sample size over the few seasons now that I don't know if Cleveland's front office really realizes the problem. You know, I really don't know if they realize that And again, you always want to make sure that you're getting that value back for how good your players are. But I don't know if they realize that these guys just don't work and that they're never going to break through. Like, I can see Mobley getting better offensively. I can see Garland bouncing back to a certain level offensively. But I just don't think the skill sets complement each other enough. And again, I don't know if Cleveland's ever going to realize it in time. So, yeah, I think they're the same team from last year. And as you said, man, in the NBA, that's a problem. Everybody gets better every offseason. If you don't get better, I'm not going to view you in a different light. So I think Cleveland's the exact same team from last year. And last year's team was very similar to the team that, they were the year before that.
Right. And again, it's tough because last year you draw an Orlando team that I do think was much more limited offensively than they will be this year now with Boston, with a better Knicks team, with presumably a healthier and just a stronger Sixers team with Paul George in there, and with the Bucks, who are still the kings of this division. Like, now it's going to be a lot harder for you to win a playoff series when you are the same caliber basketball team. I do think that it's probably tough for Cleveland's front office to conceptualize that, like, there is urgency in moving off of this group, because when they put this group together 2 years ago, I mean, it was a ridiculously talented young core. Donovan Mitchell was the oldest member of this big four. He was 26 years old. Darius Garland was coming off an all-star season in his third year. Evan Mobley, I was as high on as anybody. I thought that he was undeniably going to be a star in this league. And by the way, I am still high on Evan Mobley, not quite as high as I was on him as a prospect. But Jared Allen was coming off of an all-star season, even though he clearly didn't have the same ceiling as these other dudes. But where's the progress? And what has changed with the fit? Nothing. So I think that they are what they are. They're pretty set in stone. I hope that Mobley improves. I mean, that could be the one saving grace. If he had an offensive revolution, I don't think it's happening for him at the 4 spot. And again, I love a Jalen Tyson. I don't think he's changing things for this team. I don't even know how much he's going to play as a rookie. So they are what they are, ultimately. Logan, we've talked about the Pacers a little bit. We've touched on them. We both have them finishing with the same record as the Cavs. I have these teams both winning 48 games. Indiana as my 6 seed, Cleveland as my 7 seed. What's your outlook on the Pacers for this year?
Yeah, my first question with Indiana is just what level does Tyrese Haliburton play at? Pre-hamstring injury, I mean, he was one of the best players in all of the league. 24, 13, and 4 a night. Or 24, 4, and 13 a night. And then post-hamstring injury, he was 17, 4, and 10. What I think we saw in the playoffs, I think the best version of Haliburton is asserting himself. He's playing aggressively. And I say this because Tyrese Haliburton is so fundamentally unselfish. I love the way he plays the game. The first open guy, it's like the hockey assist, man. He's not really concerned about getting the assist. He's just going to make the right decision. That's going to lead to something else on the back end.
Yep.
The Pacers just play beautiful basketball. It's so awesome. But the best version of Haliburton is consistently asserting himself as a scorer, because I think when you saw in games where he didn't do that, the Pacers would lose. Games where he was comfortable taking shots, they won. Regardless, he's going to be one of the best offensive engines in basketball. I firmly believe that because of his passing. And as we have mentioned time and time again on this show, that unselfishness permeates to the rest of the roster where everybody else wants to play that style of play. It's very Jokic-esque in the sense that the Nuggets play that style of play where they want to just hit the open man and create the best shot possible on offense. So I just wonder, how much does he impose himself as a scorer in the regular season, and what level does he reach as a pull-up jump shooter? That's going to determine the ceiling that this team can reach offensively. Regardless, they're going to be great. On the other side of this, is Indiana going to play defense? Rick Carlisle talked about it all last year. This team can only be so great with how limited they are offensively. I still think this is a really physically limited backcourt. You're going to have slider-framed guards on the court, Haliburton, Nembhard, McConnell when he's out there in lineups. I like Nesmith as a defender. I like Siakam as a defender, but when you're looking at this defense in totality, there's only such a high ceiling you can reach when you have two glaring weaknesses at the point of attack with Haliburton, with Nembhard, with McConnell at your guard spots, and when you have a limited rim protector like Miles Turner. Turner was once a really elite rim protector as he's gotten up there in age. I just don't think he's the same athlete that he once was, and he can only reach such a high level there. It's also an issue when this is not an elite rebounding team. So they were number 24 in defensive rating. They were number 24 in rebound rate. again, there's only such a high level that you can reach as a team when you're this limited defensively. So I think they're going to win a lot of games, boat racing teams with their offense, but I think they're going to give a lot of games back with their defense. But I think I do like Indiana's ceiling a little bit more than Cleveland's when we're looking at this in a playoff context. Because, one, I just think I prefer that offensive formula a little more when you can just you can duel, man. You can keep throwing punches. Cleveland can't. Cleveland has got to muck games up. They've got to grime it up. Indiana is not going to die. They're going to keep throwing punches at you and stay in the fight in a way that I don't think Cleveland can. So I like Indiana's playoff formula a little more. I like their depth a lot more than I like Cleveland's. And I also think there are ceilings that the young guys on this roster could reach. I think there's a little more room for growth with the guys. I think Nembhard probably is what he is at this point in his career. But I think Ben Mathurin has a chance to get better. I think Jarris Walker has a chance to crack the rotation and get better. I think Isaiah Jackson can get better. So I do have this team finishing with the same record as Cleveland, but I think I prefer them when we're looking at them in a playoff context and a ceiling context. Like, I don't expect a conference playoff run again from Indiana, but I think that's a little more likely than seeing a deep run from Cleveland.
I'm with you. I just think to have that sort of offensive punch, I mean, they are absurdly difficult to stop, dude. They were the best offense for the first half of the regular season. They were the best offense in the playoffs. They just do so many things at a high level. I really think this could easily be the best offense in basketball. In fact, it's probably the logical pick. I am expecting a really good season from Hallie, I think All-NBA, which he made last year, but it was an underwhelming finish to the regular season post-hamstring. But pre-hamstring injury, he was much more effective as a driver. He was much more efficient as a pull-up shooter. You mentioned the volume. I don't know that we're going to see 24 points per game from Hallie, but I don't know that he'll be super far off that. Like, I think he is closer to that than he is the Haliburton that we saw post-hamstring injury, who I still think was underrated because people don't appreciate all the advantages that he's constantly creating, setting things into motion, as you mentioned, while still being a super efficient scorer whenever he wants to be, basically. And I think that he and Siakam are a really ideal fit. I think that Siakam is just a beautiful front court mate who does bring that aspect of interior pressure that this offense was missing before adding him. He is somebody who can run inverted pick and roll. He is somebody who is super effective as a roll man. He is an elite mismatch attacker in isolation and post-up situations. He's a solid spot-up player. He's really good in transition, and this team loves to push the tempo there. It's a really great offensive duo as your foundation, and then they have really nice offensive skill around them. I mean, Miles Turner is peaking offensively. He just had a sensational offensive season as a pure jump shooter, pure pick and pop big. He's as good as anybody in basketball. Nembhard does bring some creation. We saw it last year in the playoffs. He was almost 15 points, 5.5 assists per game, had some huge displays of shot making, doesn't get anything easy for himself, but as a second ball handler, I do like him alongside Hallie. Nesmith, I think, is really quite good in that 3-and-D role. Everybody's skilled on this team, and they push the pace better than anybody, which you have to give huge props to Hallie to. They move off ball. The ball itself moves. Like, they just maximize offensive efficiency. And because they have such a brilliant playmaker as Hallie, he gets that all started. It's infectious. They have that elite perimeter offensive star. They have the big mismatch attacking versatile forward. It's just an insane offensive formula. And their depth is very good. TJ McConnell is the perfect bench point guard. Ben Shepherd, I like. Plays hard, can really shoot the basketball, very solid depth wing. Ben Mathurin, as a bench scorer, is pretty electric. Like, I think you can question some things with him in terms of his all-around skill set, right? The peripheral aspects of the game alongside his scoring, and you can question his efficiency as a scorer. But having a dude who's that athletic and has that sort of shooting ceiling at the very least as a bench player, that's a weapon that not a lot of teams have. Obi Toppin does his job very well here. He runs hard in transition. He had a career shooting season. He's an athletic finisher around the rim. The one spot that I don't love here is backup center. I think Isaiah Jackson is just okay, but it's one of the best benches in basketball overall. There's one dude who I do want to flag that I would like to see more out of, and that's Jarris Walker. And it's tough because there's not a lot of opportunity here with Siakam and Obi, who they just re-upped with, like, those minutes at the 4 are very crowded. And Jalen Smith is gone now. I mentioned I don't love Isaiah Jackson. He's solid. But Jarris doesn't play the 5, so you would have to basically go Jarris at the 4, Siakam at the 5, some small ball minutes, which I do think they could do, but I'm just still an optimist about him. We didn't see a lot of him last year, but I liked what we saw, and as a prospect, I was really a fan of his. Super versatile big forward who rebounds, who can handle, who can play make, who is a good cutter. Just an athlete who can also defend multiple positions at a high level and is a solid shooter. Small sample size, but he shot the ball well last year. I do think when he's initiating offense, he has a tendency to settle for these long twos, pull-up twos, where I'd like him to be more aggressive as a driver because he is an athlete and he is a bull, just physically how he's built. But I want to see more out of him because obviously they drafted him very highly. It's been tough to crack this rotation, but I hope that we see what he's capable of this year. So they have the firepower to outgun almost anybody. Like we talk about it, if they drew Milwaukee, they might just be able to run them out of the gym and it would be a complete shootout and maybe they could pull that off. But that's one series against a flawed team. Like this defense doesn't have a path to being even average. They're 24th in defensive rating last year. I don't think that they're any better there this year. So they have the upside. They have that sort of offensive punch that is special. But again, if you're going to string it together for multiple rounds against teams that are as good on both sides of the ball as Boston, as New York, as Philly, I don't see it with Indiana. I think the conference finals run was obviously awesome, but context is huge there. It was a decimated Eastern Conference.
And they were close against Boston in basically every game. Like those games came down to the wire. I want to give them credit for that. But I do think you see their inexperience and then their struggles defensively is what came back to bite them. I do want to see Jarris. I'm so glad that you mentioned him, man. Jarris is one of my favorite young guys in the league. He's just so well-rounded, and specifically what he could do with this team. He's a great defender. Like, Jarris is a defensive playmaker. He's got really good hands. He is super bouncy for such a big, strong dude. Like, he's one hell of a shot blocker, and it sucks because when they drafted Jarris, I was like, oh my God, this is a perfect pick. You know, they need a guy at the 4 spot. And then they go and they make the deal for Siakam, but I really think he could help their bench defense. Like, if you trotted him out, you know, and I think he could even play the 3. Like, it'd be a little bit clunky, but he's enough of a shooter and skilled offensively enough where I think it could work. He's a beast, man. This team is just so deep that I wonder if he's going to get burned, but I think he's good enough to play, and ultimately, I don't think this formula is good enough. I think it's going to. I think when Indiana reaches it, it's funny because we're talking about this in hypotheticals with Cleveland and Indiana. I think Indiana is very, very close, and I think they are building something so special with Haliburton in this offense, especially him and Siakam, because they fit together like a glove. They work so well together. I think this team is going to figure it out once they decide what young guys they're going to move off of, who they package together with some picks. And maybe that is moving off of a Nembhard or a Mathurin or a Walker or a Jackson and packaging them with picks to go out and get some more complementary stars that are just, you know, they're in their prime, that they're ready to win now. That's when I think that Indiana is going to thrust themselves into real contention. But I don't think there's a rush for that, Carson. Do you? Like, I feel like there's way more urgency with Cleveland for me than I do with Indiana.
Yeah, I don't think that I would be rushing things if I were the Pacers, but there is a couple of fundamental flaws that do need to be addressed. As much as I love Miles Turner offensively as your center, I think that they need somebody who's going to be more committed to that end of the floor, who's going to be a better rebounder at the position, who is going to be more capable of guarding in space, who's going to be a better pure rim protector. Like, really, I don't think that the ceiling is that high with Miles Turner. And although I do like Nembhard for now, and I think the fact that they drafted him in the 2nd round and he was already this good in year 2, older guy, very experienced college player, but still, like, that's awesome. But if I'm thinking, how do I want to configure my team around Tyrese Haliburton with that 2-guard spot, I do want somebody who has more of an athletic and defensive ceiling, I think. So those are the couple spots, and the Turner one is tough because where are you going to replace that offensive value and find somebody with the defensive value that you're looking for? easier said than done, but I think that I would be willing to compromise some offense to improve defensively, because that's ultimately where this team just needs to figure things out. And I like Nesmith. I think that Nesmith is the guy who checks both boxes. He's good enough on both sides of the ball alongside Hallie and Siakam. And if Walker grows into it, yeah, I think that he could be a really good fit, as you mentioned, because of what he brings defensively. They're going to be really good, dude. And they're going to be really, really fun. And as you mentioned, like, they do have time here. Haliburton is young. Siakam still has a couple more years of his prime, and they have him under contract all the way through 2028, so they're not in a rush in that sense. But we do know that this team isn't winning the title as they're currently constructed. So they don't need to rush, but they do ultimately need to get better on the defensive side of the ball, like significantly better.
Definitely. And like I said, but they've got enough assets. If I had to pick like the odd guy out, I would probably say it's Nembhard, just because I do think that Nembhard brings a good skill set that teams would be interested in. I think he's a little bit redundant as an offensively minded guy with Haliburton. You see his value in the playoffs, though, man. That dude is a baller. I hated on Andrew Nembhard coming into the playoffs, man. I was a big hater on him. He made me eat my words, man, every game.
No, he's tough.
He's a baller, and he does not fear the moment. I kind of got tired of them saying that on the broadcast, but it was so true. Like,
it's true.
You need a big shot, he's going to take it. You need a play made, he's going to make it. Like, he may make some mistakes, but he's not going to come back scared. He's not going to come back scared at all. The guy does not fear the moment. And that's why I think he brings an exceptional amount of value, and why he would probably be the guy that I would trade. Just because I think you can get good value for him. And he doesn't fit with your top star in Tyrese Haliburton because they have similar skill sets. But, yeah, I don't think there's a need to rush it, man. I think you take inventory, you take stock this year, and I think they need to capitalize when the time is right. And I think that window is probably when Boston is fading out, and I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know if that's a year from now. I don't know if that's 2 years from now. I don't know when exactly that's going to be. That's when I would probably be willing to pull the trigger and move my chips into the table as Boston's fading out of their, reign of terror. Because I do think it's going to be a reign of terror. I think Boston's going to win the championship again this year, and then we'll see where we go from there. But I don't think there's any rush. But I think Indiana has the assets where they can make those moves and thrust themselves into title contention when the time is right.
I do like Nembhard, man. I've been an advocate of his. I forgot about your hating on him, and I stood up valiantly, and I said, nah, this dude is a baller. The intermediate shot making is nasty. Just a good pick-and-roll ball handler, good field there. Like, offensively, he is a good fit. But again, this team has to improve defensively. Andrew Nembhard is not your answer there. TD, Tutty, taking it to the house, in for 6. Whatever you call a touchdown, one thing's for sure. Touchdowns matter more at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL.
On the ground, in the air, from the special teams or the defense, we don't care how they score them. We want to bet on touchdowns, and DraftKings Sportsbook is delivering. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple, like picking a player to score a touchdown or how many TDs will be in a game. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick.
Ready to do a touchdown dance of your own? New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Let's move on, Logan, to teams that have much bigger problems, though. Have your pick of the litter, man. Who do you have next in this division?
Man, I've got the Bulls here, and I wonder if I might be even too optimistic with this record prediction.
Let's hear it.
I have them going 29-53, and I wonder if that's even too much. Like, my big question is just obviously how this new young core looks together. There's a lot of moving pieces here. I think Kobe White is the crown jewel of this bunch. He's one of the best spot-up players in basketball. He's an elite off-movement and distance shooter. Last year he gave you 19, 5, and 5 in a bigger role with Zach LaVine's absence. And if I'm being honest with you, I don't really think they needed to go out and get Josh Giddey, and I'm not expecting much from him.
Yeah.
First,
Thanks for being honest with us. I agree.
Yeah. Let's have a philosophical debate about this. Carson, you put out an excellent video yesterday. I really enjoyed watching it. You breaking down the Rondo versus CP3 debate historically. If you guys haven't watched that, I think you should go and check it out. But also, it just astounded me how many people were sticking up for Rondo in that debate. And Carson and I talk a lot about a lot of broad sports logical fallacies and illogical fallacies, and one of them here is the ring attribution error. And I think Rondo gets propped up in so many different ways historically because, and it's like, and people misconstrue it as hate, Carson, because they go in the comment section. Carson, I love you because you love basketball, man, and you appreciate all these guys for their skill sets and what they do. And you do have a deep appreciation for what Rajon Rondo brings to the table. One of the smartest guys on the court at all times. Absolutely. An elite passer, one of the greats, a great defender. But I like how you can also separate your love for Rajon Rondo and his skill set with his limitations. Because I think people look at Rondo and they go, oh, he was the floor general for one of the most nostalgic teams in basketball history, the 2008 Celtics. It's an awesome roster. They're a lot of fun. They are immortalized in basketball history because of what they achieved. But then you have people in the comments section going, well, he won a ring. Yeah. He won a ring. He was their floor general. Guys, if they had Chris Paul, that team maybe doesn't lose a game. Yeah. I mean, they might go 82-0.
Just some real quick stats. I love that we've gotten to the Rondo CP3 debate. I'm fascinated in where you're going with this. Rondo in that playoff run, 10 points, 6 assists, 49% true shooting. Clearly, undeniably, by far their fourth best player. And that's where ring attribution doesn't make sense. When you're comparing a number 4 to a number 1, both on elite teams, and you're saying the number 4 is better, even though the number 1 does everything that he does at a high level as well with the playmaking and the defense, and then is a far, far better scorer so he can actually lead great offenses on his own, I think the guy who's the number 4 is better because his team won a championship. It doesn't make sense. We need to stop it.
You're comparing a Wagyu steak to a baked potato, man. It doesn't hold. It doesn't
by
hold
the way,
water.
Both very nice things to eat.
Don't get me wrong. I love a baked potato. You put some cheese on there, a little bit of bacon. So,
sure.
Maybe you like sour. I'm not a big sour cream guy. Maybe you like it.
Yeah.
Go to town. Like, it works together, but there's layers, man. I'm taking that steak all day long. What I'm getting at here effectively is, you hit the nail on the head in the video, and I think it's such an important point that you have made. The pass-first point guard, and you broke it down brilliantly. It is a code word for a guy that can't put the ball in the bucket. It is a fundamental limiter as a primary ball handler, and it's something that I've taken that and I've applied it to breaking down basketball prospects. When I am breaking down a point guard and I'm evaluating a really good ball handler, if the guy can't put the ball in the cup, I just wonder if he can ever be a really effective basketball player because, as you say in the video, he's not going to get extra attention. He's not going to bend the defense in a way that a Chris Paul could because you're just not going to give him extra defensive attention. You're going to be content with letting him go to work one-on-one against whoever is defending him because he's likely not going to be efficient. That's good basketball. That is good, just basketball theory. And so what I'm getting at with all of this is, I'm going to make the same argument with Josh Giddey. You can be tantalized by the playmaking. You can watch the highlights and go, wow, man, this guy's a really good passer. Like, he's phenomenal in that respect. But you're never going to be threatened by Josh Giddey offensively because he can't score the ball. Like, he shot 39% outside of the restricted area last season. He shot 32% on above the break threes. And Giddey can have his moments hitting wide open threes with that hitchy-ass jumper. He can have his moments hitting floaters. But the reality is the Thunder benched this guy on the playoffs because he couldn't hit open shots. And I thought it was a fundamental misstep by the front office in this offseason to trade for him. I just think he clunks up your offense. I don't think he's as good of a defender as Alex Caruso, obviously. Alex Caruso is one of the best in basketball. But I also think that Kobe White should be your building block offensively. And I think by taking the ball out of his hands, you're doing him a little bit of a disservice in his growth. And I think Ayu Dosunmu, in my opinion, is a more valuable commodity than Josh Giddey. That may be a hot take. And so I think a lot of people may look at my record prediction for Chicago and go, oh, well, he's dropping them by 10 wins because they lost DeMar DeRozan. Well, yes, that's a component of it. I think Chicago is going to be worse in clutch games where DeMar won them a ton of close, tight-knit battles, and I think they're going to lose out on a lot here. But they also lost Alex Caruso, and I think they're going to lose a lot more games because of his loss defensively. And I just don't like Josh Giddey ultimately as your building block when you're looking at him as an offensive centerpiece. I don't think he's a good offensive centerpiece. I think you're looking at a guy that is flawed offensively, that can't score. I'm not saying he's not going to have his moments. He's probably going to have some really cool passes this year. He's probably going to rebound the ball well, and he might be on triple-double watch. But those things don't win you games, and I just think he is an inherently flawed offensive player. I don't think he's a good defender. So what does he really bring you? He's a fun passer? So I think they bungled that trade. I think they could have got more value for Caruso. I think they could have gotten a more complimentary star. Not a star, but they could have gotten a more complimentary player to this timeline with guards that I like in Kobe White, in, Ayu Dosunmu. And I just don't think they got the best value possible. So I don't like Giddey. I think the fact that they lost DeMar and Caruso for poor value is going to hurt. I thought they should have traded DeMar when they had the opportunity before letting him walk in free agency. I said the Bucks are in no man's land. I mean, the Bulls really, really, really are in no man's land. Yeah, there's not a lot of encouraging things that I can say about the Bulls, and I don't like this team offensively. I don't like them defensively. I have more to say, but I will let you go before I ramble.
Yeah, I'm not a Josh Giddey guy, and I've been very open about that. I made a YouTube video about it this past year, and one of the fundamental reasons is what you laid out. When you are a great technical passer, that's nice, but it's only so valuable if you can't stress the defense as a scorer, right? You can facilitate actions. You can be a great inbound passer. You can put the ball in the money when a guy is curling off of a screen. You can execute all those things. But if you aren't drawing a second defender, if you aren't getting into the teeth of the defense and drawing help, you aren't creating openings for your teammates that you can then take advantage of with your playmaking. So you're not creating advantages ultimately. And with Giddey, it's pretty simple. If you can't shoot and score, and you can't defend, and you're a below-average NBA athlete, you're not going to succeed. That archetype doesn't work ever. Find me a single example of a player in that archetype who has succeeded in the NBA. Doesn't happen. So do I think that this is a better fit for Giddey, even though he is certainly dealing with less offensive skill? I actually think that this role for him individually in a vacuum is a little bit better because he'll be allowed to create more out of pick and roll. That is where he is more effective than when he's off ball and he's in a spot up role because he's just such a bad catch and shoot player. Do I think that'll be good for the Bulls offense though? Is Josh Giddey somebody I want to entrust with lead ball handling responsibilities? No, because of his clear limitations as a scorer. I will say the one nice thing about this fit from the Giddey perspective is that he is alongside two elite catch and shoot guards in Levine and Kobe White, who are both score first. So it's like the fit isn't bad per se on offense. Josh Giddey is just not someone I want running my offense. He can average 15, 7, and 7 on 53% true shooting. That's not going to move me. He's going to struggle mightily to shoot from beyond the arc. He's going to struggle to get to the rim, and when he does, he's going to struggle to finish around there. I mean, I did a whole breakdown, but Josh Giddey is well below league average in terms of field goal percentage in every range. The only decent aspect of his scoring is his floater game, and he's solid in transition. But he has fundamental limitations that you just don't overcome to become a good basketball player. People can look at the raw production and they can say, oh, look, he's this big ball handler who can really pass the ball. His athleticism, his lack of scoring skill, these aren't things that he can overcome. His limitations on the defensive end of the ball, and that, man, is where I think Chicago is going to be brutal this year. Replacing Caruso with Josh Giddey, this was already a bottom 10 defense last year. There's worse defense in the league potential here, man. I don't think that they will be the literal worst because I think they're going to try to compete more than like a Washington who, is just going to be broken there. But everybody outside of Patrick Williams in this starting five is a clear negative defensively. So that's going to be their greatest weakness. One guy who could be a potential solution to that is Lonzo Ball, who is apparently targeting an opening game return. I think he'd be a huge upgrade over Giddey, because if I'm going to take two big ball handlers, both of whom are limited scorers but creative playmakers, but then I can make one a very good shooter and a very good defender, whereas the other one is neither. He's super limited in both those areas. Yeah, I would take Lonzo every day of the week. But the Bulls just invested in Giddey. Seems like he's going to start. And Lonzo hasn't played basketball in 2.5 years. It's just hard for me to believe that he's going to be healthy enough to be a factor this season. Like even Jonathan Isaac, right? He was a guy who I wasn't sure would ever be healthy enough again to complete a season of basketball. He did it last year, but he did it playing 15 minutes a game. Like they were still very careful. He still missed 24 games in by far his healthiest season. So unfortunately, I'm not expecting a miracle in terms of Lonzo's health. I'd rather have Lonzo or I'd rather have Ayo starting over Giddey, just for what it's worth, because I do think that Ayo is going to be more capable defensively, much better shooter, really good feel, doesn't have the same glaring limitations, but I think it's going to be the Giddey show.
I completely agree, dude. And that's what makes it so puzzling to me. I just like the ball in those guys' hands more. Everybody can shoot in the lineup. And call me crazy, I think this probably takes you out of even being in that play-in range, but if you could deal LaVine, and I know he might be spoiled goods at this point because the trade rumors have been going on forever. He's got a mammoth contract and an archetype that's just hard to deal. Played so poorly last year, his stock just dropped. I would love a Ayo, Kobe, Buzelis, Williams, Vooch lineup, and I think that you've at least got the two best defensive wings in your rotation. Those guys can space the floor a little bit. Ayo and Kobe can divvy up duties.
Logan, what do you have? Direction. You have a timeline.
Exactly.
You are a young team. You're not expecting to make the play-in. You're seeing what you have in these young guys in featured roles, and you're revving up to pick in a fringe top 5 sort of range next year.
100%, dude. And on the Lonzo point, God, I love Lonzo so much, dude. I think he's a good dude. He's so much fun to watch. The guy's brilliant. His mind, his basketball IQ. I'm rooting for him always, but I'm just at this point. I don't know if it's like Ben Simmons almost, man. And I just mean that in the sense that I just don't expect anything from Lonzo. Watching him struggle to walk and to run. It's not that easy to get yourself back up to game speed, man. It takes a while to, just get back your conditioning, to get the game speed, the feel. And then, and that's just the athletic and physical part of it. It's also a problem getting back up to getting your shot back, getting
confident, comfortable in your body, thinking that you can trust your first step.
Exactly.
A million different things that make it so hard to do.
Yeah, and that's probably the biggest one is this is a football reference, but you see on Thursday Night Football last night when they're talking about Kirk Cousins playing back from his Achilles and him planting. Basketball, it's not just dropping back and throwing passes. It's your entire body getting back into shape. And just with how far Lonzo has been coming back, and I just wonder if all the Ball family with LaMelo's issues, I wonder if their bodies are just equipped to hold up in general. Mm-hmm. I'm rooting for Lonzo. I'm praying for Lonzo, man. I want to see it come to fruition, but at this point, I don't know if I'm ever going to be confident the guy's going to play real basketball again. So the theoretical version of Lonzo, the one that we saw before the injury, man, the 40% shooter, the defender, the genius, the good rebounder, I mean, that was an awesome basketball player. I hope that we see Lonzo take the floor. But I don't know if we're ever going to see that version of Lonzo come back to fruition. But the bottom line with the Bulls, there's going to be a bad defense. As you mentioned, I think that they have a chance to be the worst in the league. It's a young group. It's a bad defensive backcourt. You got Vooch at the 5. And I just think we're going to see real major regression without DeMar DeRozan and Alex Caruso. So my 29 win mark, I think that may be even too ambitious. I could definitely see the Bulls winning less games. So the only two things I'm really looking at for the Bulls this year, What do we see out of the young guys? How much do they progress? I am very encouraged by Matas Buzelis. I think he brings you a multifaceted skill set that is going to help you win games. I don't know what he's going to be offensively, but he's a smart decision maker. I like his basketball IQ. He's not going to try to do too much offensively. I like that we've seen in offseason workouts, we've seen him growing his game, ball handling, and shooting. I think that is the biggest area where he needs to improve, becoming confident as a pull-up jump shooter, as a shooter in general, growing his ability to handle the ball under pressure. But I like his basketball IQ, and defensively and athletically, he's going to be good in transition. He's going to run the hell out of the floor. He's a good athlete, a sneaky good vertical athlete. He's a good help-side shot blocker. He's got good instincts on that end. I like him defending one-on-one. So I think he's going to be a real building block for Chicago down the line. And then I'm just looking if they trade Zach LaVine. Is any team going to be willing to bite on that contract and that player? That's what I'm looking at. There's no real major aspirations for Chicago this year.
No, I agree. I do like Buzelis a lot. I thought that he was an amazing pick at number 11. I thought he was more like a fringe top 5 guy in this class. I'm not expecting a super big impact out of him this year, but he's just a jack of all trades. You mentioned I love his feel as a cutter, as a connective playmaker. He is a good athlete. He's a good ball handler for being 6'10". I agree he can tighten up the handle, but good for his size. Versatile defender. I really like his secondary rim protection. His ceiling is going to hinge on that shot, as you laid out. He's never going to be like a great self-creator offensively, but he's going to do basically everything else really well. And if he's a good spot-up shooter, like, that's a dude who could creep into some star impact conversations. That's a really good basketball player.
It's one of the most valuable archetypes in basketball today, man. The do-it-all wing who's athletic and can shoot. Like,
absolutely.
I do think that, I mean, if Buzelis figures it out offensively, yeah, dude, you're looking at
the shot, man.
He can maybe be an all-star.
Yeah, if he gets the shot, I legitimately think that is a real possibility. I agree, though. You're going to have a really hard time moving Vooch and LaVine. LaVine because of the contract, Vooch because nobody wants a player in that archetype of that age. So you just got to live with your offensively skilled, defensively bad old guys. I do think LaVine will have something of a bounce back from last season. I think that he'll shoot better. I still think LaVine is a hell of a scorer of the basketball. I think that combination of athleticism and like insane 40+% three-point shooting, off movement, high volume, that is going to lead him to produce. I mean, this is a dude who we've seen kind of walk into 25 a night on 60% true shooting over the last few seasons. Before this last year where we got a small sample size before he was injured. But is that going to drive winning for this Chicago team? No. And I do like Coby White. I know you love Coby White. I do think he's a pretty elite pure shooter of the basketball, especially spotting up. He's a good pick-and-roll creator. I think he's grown to be a solid playmaker, but because of that lack of high-end athleticism, next-level self-creation, he's still an average efficiency scorer. He's still a mediocre playmaker. Like, I think he'd be a really good number 3 on an offense. I'm not foreseeing another leap out of him, nor do I think that he is like the foundational piece here. So I just feel bad for Bulls fans. And then yesterday, dude, they signed Josh Primo and then they cut him. But you're signing Josh Primo to a team that has Josh Giddey. Why are you signing Josh Primo?
I mean, this is just like the biggest comedy of errors I've ever seen from this front office. I think they are the worst front office in basketball. 2 to 3 years ago, I mean, we were imploring this team to dump DeRozan and to dump LaVine while they still had high value, and these guys were like intriguing assets that teams could trade for, and Vooch included. And then the front office doubled down, said, no, we want to build a competitive basketball team. And it's like, hey, guys, get your head out of your ass. You're going to be in the play-in. You're not even going to be a real playoff team. And then they do it again last year. They don't make any moves whatsoever. They let DeMar walk in free agency. They give Caruso away for Josh Giddey.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, like, is this like a prank that you signed Josh? What kind of – is this a joke?
And after the Gar-Pax era that was worse, just awful. I mean, this has been a terrible basketball team for a significant majority of the 21st century. Obviously, they had like 5 good years in there in the early 2010s. Karnisovas has been really bad. And the configuration of this big four that they put together, that was never going to be a team that had like a title ceiling. But
Lonzo,
I did think with Lonzo that was going to be a good basketball team. But then the
100%.
second that Lonzo became unavailable, they were no longer a good basketball team and held on too long. As you mentioned, trade Caruso for pennies, and you get nothing back for DeRozan. And now you're just here with
that
Levine
was just
and
a
Vooch.
straight. They did a straight swap, right? It was just Caruso for Giddey, right?
Yeah, I think so. Did they attach draft capital with Caruso? There might have been a little thrown in there too. Brutal, man. So they're not going to fully bottom out. And what's hilarious, bro, is we both have them winning 29 games. They're not out of the play-in race whatsoever. Like, I tweeted about this today. I think we might see a 30-win team in the play-in in the Eastern Conference. Yeah. It is that bad. And that's going to be the first moment I think we look at the play-in and we're like, oh, boy, do we need this? Because it's so fun in the West, but it was already shitty enough last year with Atlanta and Chicago.
That's what
we're going to be going a level down, dude.
Should we like open the play-in to be? Should we like let 2 extra teams in the West to like battle it out to get an East playoff spot?
Well,
like
the rational thing there, I feel like, would be abolish conferences, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah, true.
But it's criminal. It's criminal. I mean, the 12 seed in the West is going to be better than the 9 seed in the East. The gap between the 8 teams that I think will be in the playoffs in the East and everybody else is massive. But I don't have Chicago in the play-in. I have them right outside, but I have them 1 game behind Toronto, who I have as my 10 seed. So, you know, maybe that's best case scenario for the Bulls. You make the play-in and you get to claim that you played postseason basketball like you have the last couple years. But we all know that you really didn't, and you're going nowhere, and you're stuck here, and you're in no man's land. I mean, they're going to be bad. They'll get a decently high pick this year, but not as high as they could if they had just fully embraced the tank. You know who fully embraced the tank, though? My God, the Detroit Pistons. I mean, this team has just been in the absolute gutter. 14 wins last year. Yikes. What are you expecting from them this season?
You know, you never really know with the NBA draft lottery, though, man. You say, like, I mean, their odds are going to be worse, but the Bulls could very well end up with a top pick. I mean, just the only reason I say that is just because the Pistons have gotten boned so hard by the lottery the past. I think they've gotten the 5th pick every single year, and they've had, I want to say, the best odds to win it twice. I mean, it's ridiculous. So,
yeah.
And the Hawks leapfrog from, like, 11 to 1. That was insane. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, they got Cade the one time.
True.
But since then, it's been 5th 3 years in a row.
I guess the first thing that I'm looking at with Detroit is just how they strike the balance between their best players and their young core, because I don't think it overlaps. I think those things are separate from one another. Like, and how do you prioritize like your long-term growth with these guys versus the guys that complement Cade better right now? Because one of my things with Cade is everybody wants to bag on him because he hasn't led the Pistons out of the absolute gutter yet. And my thing is they don't have a complementary roster around Cade. A primary ball handler like Cade would thrive with better spacing. And so they addressed that this offseason. They bring in Tobias Harris. They had a ton of cap space. They bring in Malik Beasley. They bring in Tim Hardaway Jr. Like, no BS, these are going to be the best shooters that Cade has ever played with on his team. But with all this young talent, you wonder, how do they stagger these minutes? Who do you start alongside him? They've got Jaden Ivey to give minutes to. They've got Asar Thompson to give minutes to. They've got Jalen Duren. They've got Ron Holland now. And I like all of those guys. Ron Holland was one of my favorite prospects in this class just because of what a freak athlete he was. And, the flashes that you see of shot creation and self-creation. Jaden Ivey was one of my favorite guys in the class. Just the burst and the athleticism and what he could do with the ball in his hands. And you saw the flashes of shot creation. Asar Thompson, another freak athlete, but again, he can't shoot the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to hear your opinion on this too, Carson. I would probably trot out a lineup with Cade, Beasley, I guess Asar, Tobias, and Duren. It sucks because you're always going to have 2 or 3 non-threats as a shooter alongside Cade. But I'd probably bring Ivy off the bench and let him run my bench unit with Holland, with Hardaway, with Paul Reed, and somebody else. I would just try to get as much shooting around Cade just to see what kind of offense he could do. So defenses can't give all that attention to him. Luckily for Detroit, you're not going to have to see any more lineups with Duren and Beef Stew alongside each other, although
dude.
Beef Stew was hitting some threes last year. Not great volume. He was hitting them, but
Yeah.
I don't think that the offense is ever going to be as clunky as it was last year, but it's still not going to be great. But that's what I do. What do you think the starting five should look like, and how would you try to strike that balance between best fit and the young core?
I don't disagree with what you just laid out. However, I do think Jaden Ivey will be starting for this team. I mean, we saw Monty willing to bench him at times last year, but I think that this is kind of a make or break year for Ivey. Like, not really, but he didn't progress how you would have liked to see last year. And long term, I do think you have to gauge that fit with him and Cade. So it is an interesting balance between the Detroit Pistons trying to be an actual professional basketball team and just trotting out the young guys because that's all that matters for their long-term future. But you can destroy those young guys when you don't put professional basketball players alongside them. So I do lean more on the side of putting actual vets who can play out there just so your guys aren't drowning all year long. But I think that Ivey's probably going to start.
I
see what you're saying. He has more ball handling duties if he's with the second unit. You're putting a better pure shooter clearly alongside Cade with Beasley.
And don't get me wrong, please do not X him out the way Monty did. I don't know what Monty was doing last year with his giving Killian Hayes a bunch of burn too. Like, Killian Hayes was already spoiled goods at that point last year. But, and I'm not saying never play Cade with Jaden. I'm just saying stagger their minutes more where they both can have the ball in their hands.
I don't disagree from a basketball perspective that would be the best approach.
But, I mean, it is just with the young guys. And I think they're going to struggle to space the floor with whatever lineup configuration that they trot out. But I really think that you're tanking Cade's effectiveness as a creator. If you're giving him Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, Jalen Duren, and Tobias Harris. Tobias Harris is your only competent floor spacer. Just as an example, because they're never going to be as good as this team this year. This is not my best example, but the Cavs, when Evan Mobley was hurt and when Darius Garland was hurt and you gave Donovan Mitchell one vertical athlete and you gave him 3 floor spacers, boom, the Cavs figured it out. I don't think Cade is that kind of creator the way that Donovan Mitchell is. He doesn't have those athletic gifts, and he can't stress a defense the way that Donovan Mitchell can. And I don't think that Duren can single-handedly anchor your defense the way a Jarrett Allen or a Evan Mobley can. But just fundamentally, the 4 out, 1 in, that would just work so much more with Cade. Because, again, with Cade doing that, the defense isn't scared. They can just send all the extra help and all the extra attention Cade's way, and it just makes his life that much harder. And I just don't want to see Cade have to deal with that. It's gonna create all these narratives, I think, around Cade, man, where they're gonna go, he's not a good offensive engine. This guy's a bum. He's a bust. They already said that last year. I don't believe that. And don't get me wrong, I've been underwhelmed by the fact that I don't think that Cade's going to be able to find his way to easy offense because he lacks those offensive traits. But I just think you're handicapping him to such a low offensive ceiling with these non-shooters. They're going to struggle again. I don't know. The Pistons have been in a real effed up spot for about 15 years now, man. I mean, they have not had a competent basketball team in a very, very long time. I don't know, man. I think you, at the end of this season, Carson, in my opinion, because the Pistons are not going to be in the playoffs, they're not going to be anywhere close. I think you take your guys that you think fit and work, and you keep them with Cade, and you probably ship a few of these guys off. If it's Ivy, if it's Asar, it's not going to be Holland. I'm probably shopping Beef Stew. I'm probably shopping Jaden Ivey. And it's not even a Jaden Ivey. I like both of these guys as basketball players individually. You just need to find guys who can complement Cade more. And I think that has to be the goal for the front office of Detroit. It's just finding guys that are really good that will complement Cade right here, right now. Mm-hmm. And that would be my sole focus with this year, man. That's my sole goal, is to make life easier on Cade and to find guys that complement him to the highest level. Because I like a lot of these guys' skill sets individually, but they just don't mesh with Cade's play style.
No, but that is where I like what Detroit did, just in terms of Adding grown-ups, man. Everybody hates Tobias Harris. Here, he is a godsend. Having a big forward who can effectively score in isolation and post-up situations and hit 37% of his threes, like, you cannot overstate how much that means to this Detroit offense. Bringing in the elite pure three-point shooting of a Malik Beasley. Tim Hardaway Jr. I'm not a big fan of, but at least he can actually shoot the basketball. Fontecchio, bringing him back on a really team-favorable deal. Awesome shooter, really solid defender. They won't just be trotting out these, like, actual nightmare lineups where you're starting both Stewart and Duren, where you're starting Killian Hayes and Asar Thompson with these dudes who I do like, but, like, just in terms of floor spacing, it's actually unbelievable. It's basketball terrorism. They're constructed like a more serious basketball team now. And I do still believe in Cade. I think that Cade will absolutely be an all-star level guard in this league. I think putting up 23 points and 7.5 assists on 55% true shooting in this situation is impressive. The efficiency isn't good, but I mean, how could it be? I think he's got multiple real high-end traits. I think his pull-up shooting is maybe not elite, but it's damn good. 48% from mid-range, 36% from deep overall. I think his playmaking is, again, knocking on the door of elite. He doesn't have elite accuracy, but at his size, he just has so many angles available to him. His vision is really good. He's deceptive. And that size in and of itself, like, it helps him as a scorer. It helps him as a playmaker. It helps him defensively, where I think he has real high-end upside. I do think his limitations finishing and in terms of generating rim pressure will keep him from being a superstar. If you're talking about him being like a tier 1, a top 10 guy, he shot 54% in the restricted area this past year. That's brutal. He doesn't blow by people. He's not that sort of elite athlete as a finisher. And that does make it hard for him to create super easy offense for himself. But with everything else, he's pretty damn good. And I was really impressed by how he held up in this brutal situation where literally he's seeing 5 defenders in the paint, right? You can blitz him. He can make the right read. What is anybody going to do about it when Asar Thompson and Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren are all out there on the floor? And Killian Hayes, that was actually their starting lineup for a portion of last season. There's nothing to be done, man. Nobody else is a capable offensive player, especially away from the rim. So I'm in on Cade. I really like Cade, but I do think that you need to see more out of Jaden Ivey. 15 a night on 53.5% true shooting last year. He does have some juice on ball. He shifts gears very nicely. He can be physical as a driver. He's got that strong build. He's got a really nice package of scoop finishes, but he still wasn't a super efficient finisher at the rim. And outside of that, 14th percentile spot-up player, under 34% from deep. Again, the three-point shot was a question about him as a prospect. We haven't seen encouraging results. It's been low volume, and it hasn't been very efficient. Not super low volume, but as a pull-up shooter, pretty low volume. He shot only 39% inside the paint, outside the restricted area. Not very good intermediate floater touch. Under 38% for mid-range. Still a below-average playmaking guard. Like, these questions we had about him as a prospect, as really a combo guard, how much could he progress as a playmaker? How much could he progress as a shooter? Unfortunately, the answers to those questions haven't been good so far.
I mean, when we're giving Cade some grace with his limitations too, I want to give Jaden some grace
agree.
as well. Like, I also don't think this is a great situation for a guy like him. When you give Jaden Ivey spacing, I think a lot of stuff would be better. Cleaner paints to attack, more shooting on the floor in general. But I think that's kind of a big theme for Detroit this season, and who they're going to decide to keep around with this core is legitimately just who can stretch the floor, who can make shots. I mean, I mentioned this pre-draft with Ron Holland. On shots outside of the restricted area, Ron Holland shot 31%. That's on every shot that is not inside the restricted area. He shot 29% out of the mid-range and 24% from deep. Jaden Ivey last year shot 34% from deep. It's like, that's going to be a big determinant on who sticks around on this team too. And just figuring out floor spacing, I think, is going to be really beneficiary to whatever guards are on this roster.
Agreed. And that's why I highlight that with Ivy as a key category. That and the playmaking, I don't think you can really say are products of the situation. Like, I do think he'd be more efficient as a driver in a situation with better spacing. Absolutely. I think that applies to every guard in Detroit. And I do think he has a real ability to get into the paint and do some damage there. Like, I'm not out on Jaden Ivey as an offensive player, but also his defense is bad right now, man. And it's not just like apathetic young team bad, although that is certainly a part of it. His positioning, his IQ are just not there. He gets blown by a shocking amount. Like, the amount of times in which he seems to try to force somebody to drive towards an angle where there's no help. Like, I just don't think that he understands defense at this stage, and he does have ability to tap into there. He's super long. He has a strong frame. He's a good athlete. We just haven't seen it at all. So he still has all the tools that made him a top 5 pick, and it's only been 2 years, and young guards are inefficient, and they do struggle defensively. Like, these aren't abnormal things. But am I convinced that he's a foundational piece in this backcourt? No. And I haven't seen progress in some of the key areas that I would have liked to, which is why I do think this is a really, really important year for Jaden Ivey, seeing how he fits alongside Cade specifically. I also think that this is a big year for Jalen Duren, because I think there's a lot to like with Duren. He's a really good finisher. He's got decent touch. He shot almost 44% inside the paint outside the restricted area for a big. That's good. He's got really nice passing feel, and he's an elite dominant rebounder. And defensively, he has solid tools. He's a solid mover in space. He's got a strong build. He's got a 7'5" wingspan, but he has not been a remotely effective defensive anchor for Detroit. As a rim protector, he was not effective. He held opposing players just 1% below their average at the rim. That's across all positions. Any player that could be defending the rim. So when you're a center, you want to have a much larger margin than that. For a center, that's a bad number. He's got to play harder. He's got to play smarter. That's going to determine whether or not he's a quality starting big. Because offensively, right, he has the athleticism, he has the offensive rebounding, and he has the playmaking feel. But if you just have his offensive skill and you aren't a defensive anchor, a plus defender, then you're not going to hang around as a starter in the league. Now, I do think with more experience, with more effort, he can be that defensively. Hard to evaluate all these guys defensively because I think they all have more ability than they've tapped into. The reason that I put Cade in a different category in terms of my confidence is we've seen him lock in for stretches. Like, I think about his second season before he got hurt. Like, he had some really, really impressive defensive moments. I've seen more there, but we still do need to see more. And then if we look at the other foundational pieces here, the young guys who they've invested top draft picks in with Asar and Holland, they're both absolute freak athletes. I was just perplexed by the pick with Ron Holland this year because they have very similar skill sets. Like, they do a lot of the same stuff. They are super long, high motor, freak athlete, versatile defensive dogs who rebound really well, can attack in transition, can cut, can screen, have some playmaking feel, but cannot shoot the basketball. Broken shooters. So long term, if we're drafting these dudes in the top 5, we're thinking they're going to start next to each other. And they're going to start next to a center, right? So their non-shooting is amplified by the fact that we're putting them with a non-shooting center in Duren. It just feels like you're screwing them both because they're not both going to figure it out. Maybe Holland does. I think he has a better chance than Asar, but I still don't expect that to happen. So they have these really unique skill sets, but you can't try to duplicate that within a roster, within one lineup, because now their limitations become all the more glaring when you have two dudes who are non-shooters. And that starts to outweigh their strengths because now you're duplicating their strengths on the floor at all times. They're not as distinct. They're not providing that sort of raw value to the lineup.
You're duplicating the weaknesses too.
Exactly. Well, that's the big problem is that you're duplicating the weaknesses. So it's not going to be both of them. It's going to be either Asar or it's going to be Ron Holland. I think Asar is a freak defender. I just made a video about his brother yesterday. I love his brother's game. I am higher on his brother, but Asar does a lot of the same good stuff. I mean, they're just such absurd athletes. And Asar is going to be one of the best defenders in this league, and he's going to be one of the best positional rebounders, and he's got a good playmaking feel. That shot's not coming around, though.
That's why I feel like I want to hang on to Asar more.
Yeah, I prefer Asar, too.
I like Ron a lot. I really liked Ron, but I wanted him to go to a situation like Utah or something like that a little bit later in the first round. I thought Chicago could have been a good fit too, but just like somewhere where he could have the ball in his hands a little bit more and create, because his IQ is still not great. Defensively, you'll see Ron fall asleep, out of position. You're not going to get that with Asar, and that's why I think Asar is a little bit more. And I think Asar is the better athlete and better rebounder. And so just like the things that they're good at, I just think Asar's better at them. I'm more confident in Ron figuring it out offensively, but considering how far away both of them are, and that Asar is just so much further along defensively, I'd probably want to keep him. But
Agreed.
It was a puzzling pick, man. I thought
Very
Zealous
puzzling.
made sense to Detroit a little bit. I thought Cody Williams made a little bit more sense to Detroit with that pick. Like, just the non-shooting element of it, man. I just thought it puzzled me draft night. It still puzzles me a little bit today.
No, it completely puzzles me. I mean, that and Salon were my least favorite picks. I do like Asar more. I liked him more as a prospect. I do think you hit the nail on the head. He's just more of a freak in the areas that both of these dudes are freaks. Ayo. But I don't know why you would draft somebody like Holland to try to pair alongside him.
Just like the last three guys to go Ivy, Asar, and then Holland, it's like, what?
Yeah, but, Ivy's in a different class as a shooter. I mean, these two
agree.
dudes are busted. And I said Asar's never going to figure the shot out. I don't mean that he can't become a low 30s% guy from deep on pretty low volume. I think for both him and his brother, that potential is there. And if they get there, I mean, these are just monstrous basketball players. What I mean is he's guaranteed to never become an above-average shooter of the basketball. That would be the single greatest work of shooting coaching and shooting development in the history of the NBA. I mean it. Like, he's that far away. But boy, does he do a lot of things at a special level. So I think Asar is the more special young talent as well. But they have the same major flaw, and I don't see how that works. So overall, this year is mostly about the young guys, obviously, but you will also be an actual functional NBA team. And I think that's good for morale, and I think it's good for the young guys' development, because you're putting them in a more serious basketball situation where they aren't constantly fighting uphill, dealing with these comical circumstances that are created by the fact that they're all young, flawed guys being put exclusively alongside other young, flawed guys and some dudes who just suck, like Killian Hayes last year. But it's going to be a struggle. I have Detroit winning 27 games. I actually think that because of Cade, because of some of the shooting that they're bringing in, because I think that Duren can tap into a little more defensively, because I just expect general progress from a team this young. Like, I don't think they're that far behind Chicago, but Chicago does have more bankable talents. But when I think about Cade and Ivy or Beasley and Tobias Harris and Duren and Asar at least bringing what he does athletically, like, this year, I don't think that should be a terrible basketball team. Like, I don't look at them like this year's Wizards, but I definitely think the play-in would be asking a lot of them, even though the play-in bar is going to be very low.
Yeah, I have them winning 22 games. I just think that's
Okay.
a really big leap year after year, and I don't know. There's just some general organizational dysfunction that I believe in with Detroit that will hold them back.
They're free of Troy Weaver.
I was going to ask, what do you think, before we get out of here, what do you think about Bickerstaff being in here instead of Monty?
I think Monty was just a disastrous fit. So I've never been a huge Bickerstaff guy, but I think he is sort of by default an upgrade. I should have mentioned Fontecchio, by the way, when I was talking about the dudes who can play now. Like, that's the thing, man. It's just capable veterans make such a big difference. This team had nothing in that regard last year.
And hopefully they should have some guidance and perspective from these guys to, like, keep them from not... I mean, like, just the body language and the vibe of this. It was a team that had given up, and hopefully these guys being in here will help them, keep their head on straight.
And I'm not out on Detroit long term. Like, I have real questions about Ivy. We need to see improvement from Duren, and Holland and Asar are not both going to work. I'm not a huge optimist, but I'm not like this team is destined to be a disaster. And if they don't really progress,
talented. They're very
they
talented.
have talent. They have talent. So when I think you put functional grown-ups alongside them, like, they should be in the range, right? They should be as good as a Charlotte. They should be within striking distance of Chicago and Toronto. Like, I really don't see a big gap between those teams. But Detroit does have more questions because of how awful they were last year. Shout out to Kofi, man. Shout out to our friend Kofi, Pistons fan. God help him. God help him.
Capture the flag, man. Capture the flag.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, Logan, before we bid the Central Division farewell?
Nas Reed, just because I'm thinking about him.
Oh, well, he is in the central United States, and we will get to his division. Believe that. And we will get to his Timberwolves, who are a very interesting team this year. All in good time. First, we got to react to some football this Sunday, so lock in for that. After all the action, we will be live as always. As I mentioned, you can find all of our NBA season preview content up to this point on our YouTube channel and across all audio platforms. I also did make a video about Amen Thompson yesterday on YouTube, why I do think he will be a star in spite of his lack of shooting. I had a ton of fun breaking down his game. I'm really, really quite enamored with him as a player. He's really interesting to watch. So check that out if you want. You can follow us across social media, TikTok, Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh to see clips from the show, trivia, graphics from the show, all that good stuff. And you can join our Discord if you want. The link to that is at the link tree across our social media bios, just to chat with the fellas, start discourse, make friendships, lifelong friendships, Logan, life-changing friendships, some would say. Really just a beautiful, beautiful place. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I've been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.